So we can go to the next overview.
Okay. The story speaks directly to the idea of a mobile museum and alternative education models. It's also spearheaded by the same person that initiated the build of more than 4,000 Rosenwald schools for Black students in the South, an initiative which we pull a great deal of inspiration from. I'm talking about Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee Movable School. I'll be reading from an entry in the Cyclopedia of Alabama written by Tuskegee Institute professor Robert Zabawa. The Tuskegee Institute Movable School was an outreach effort aimed at bringing technological advances in modern agriculture to rural people in Alabama. The movable school operated in several official incarnations, starting with the Jessup Agricultural Wagon in 1906 by agricultural professor George Washington Carver, and ending with the Booker T. Washington Agricultural School on Wheels through 1944. From its inception, Booker T. Washington envisioned Tuskegee as having an outreach mission. Soon after he arrived in Macon County to establish Tuskegee Institute in 1881, Washington began to make regular trips on horseback to talk, eat, and stay overnight with the rural people he hoped to educate at his school. It soon became evident to Washington those who needed education the most, the region's farmers, needed it brought to them because they were tied to their land and unable to travel for instruction. In 1896, George Washington Carver arrived at Tuskegee to head the School of Agriculture. He carried Washington's practice of rural visits further by loading a buggy with tools and materials and traveling to farms on weekends to give practical demonstrations. Washington took Carver's plans to Morris K. Jessup, a benefactor of the school from New York City, who supplied financial support for constructing a wagon and purchasing mules, materials for harnesses, and demonstration supplies. The total cost was $674.50, with the wagon and harness constructed on the Tuskegee campus by students. Local sentiment for the wagon was enthusiastic, and over the first summer of operations, its program reached an average of 2,000 people per month. During all visits, instructors distributed pamphlets on farm production, nutrition, and health from Tuskegee Institute. In 1918, T.M. Campbell requested support from Alabama State Extension Director John Frederick Dugar to purchase a modern vehicle to replace the Jessup wagon. He was given the needed funds and purchased a Ford truck that he named the Knapp Agricultural Truck in honor of Seaman A. Knapp, father of the National Cooperative Extension System. After 5 years, the truck, as with the wagon, was taxed beyond its means. In 1923, more than 30,000 enthusiastic supporters, many of them the African-American farmers who had been helped by the movable school, contributed $5,000 to purchase a new vehicle built in Montgomery by the Hobby Motor Company, the Booker T. Washington Agricultural School on Wheels.
Early Kickstarter.
The movable school in all its various incarnations was a commitment by Booker T. Washington to carry the educational efforts of his school at Tuskegee to the farm families of rural Alabama until it was retired in 1944. So yeah, that's the movable school by Tuskegee.
Thank you. So yeah, I think that particular overview really makes me think about this idea of community engagement in this moment and what community engagement looks like versus quote unquote outreach. I mean, I think obviously in working in this moment, these terms, engagement and outreach, have become very trendy and very buzzwordy. And so I'm curious as to what you all believe about how we do not perpetuate that trendiness and how we really remain rooted and true in what it actually is. And obviously this is a prime example of what that is. But how, when working with large organizations or institutions, how we can continue to keep that rootedness. Just curious about what you all think about that.
I think it's about, putting as much intention into the content that fills up these outreach spaces as the spaces themselves, right? Or as the websites or the spaces, right? That it's easy to make look, sound really amazing. But what's challenging is to really let it be the thing that it says it is, right? And to always be careful to be, I just think, contributing something new. Even just preparing for this video, just really wanting to make something that serves a purpose in this moment, versus just kind of talking about a project that's not going to happen for another year. It's like, okay, that's another thing that got pushed back, like, how can we take the format, whatever the format is, right? How can we take that format and fill it with the most valuable content that is the most specific for the audience that it's going to, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing about artists, huh? Like, we always are trying to figure out how to freak whatever framework we're placed in, and make it like special and more interesting and more engaging.
Yeah, and new, right?
Yeah,
I think that's like one of the
innovative.
main impulses of art making is like, what are you bringing new to the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think outreach is like especially important now, with everybody isolated. Like, this community, this common effort, and this shared space that we're trying to create with this project and our entire practices is to combat that isolation that we're all especially feeling now. Yeah. And that powerlessness that Black communities are way too familiar with, whereas now, like, the rest of the world are seeing, like,
you can't do whatever you want to do. You don't have every resource available to you.
You don't have complete freedom to move in and out of spaces that you want to move in and out of. Like, our communities have had these barriers around them, invisible, but we know, like, we're not welcome in certain places at certain times. Or if we're there, we need to have a purpose, or we need to have a passport, a white person with us that can, like, vouch for us, whereas now, like, we all hunkered down, we're forced to be in these spaces by ourselves, but they don't have to be isolationist spaces, they don't have to be just depressive spaces. They can be like just new opportunities to find that common unity that we have and we've always had.
I think you touched on before too about just artists and having to really adapt and create. And so just curious as to how you all are doing personally as artists in this moment, and how you all are dealing with it and having to adapt to this moment.
Mm-hmm. I think our creative energy has, like, shifted a bit from fine art, and now it's like, it's how we cook for one another. It's like how we infuse creativity into, like, homeschooling our baby girl. It's also like we're, like, organizing our space better and, like, interior decorating our space.
Okay, we're gonna have to be in here.
Let's make the most of it.
Yeah.
Shani was talking about painting the fire escape the other day. I think you can see, like, how deep we get. We really try to make the most of our spaces, and it's led to, like, ritual practice, like we were talking about before. Like, we're setting up altars for our loved ones that we can't be with at this moment. We're doing a little bit of yoga, a little bit of exercise. Trying to connect our body, our mind, our spirits in this place we're forced to be in.
I've been planting more, gardening more, house plants, not gardening, but more house plants. They're all flourishing. They get immense attention. I've been sewing. I've been working on a pattern for this little house robe, because again, this is where I am. And I have some actual obligation work I need to get through. But after that, I want to try doing some fabric dyeing with Baldwin. A friend of mine was posting about like these turmeric dyes, so I want to get into that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I also built a frame for my tufting gun, which I'm waiting on. I'm waiting on the backing material so I can start using it. So yeah, we're finding ways to create through this, but also I think we're finding functions for those creations, as opposed to like making through thinking through making, or making through thinking. We're like, okay, how can we affect some change in this little bit of like apartment we have in New York City?
Yeah. What about you? What you doing, Nick?
Oh man, definitely creating more, for sure. I think I mentioned it to some of the colleagues earlier. It's like, in this moment, I think mental health is the most important thing. And I think, just finding little ways that we can just enhance our care to self. So like, Monday was our first day back in the museum, and, I took some time to go outside, and I walked to Cafe Du Monde and got a coffee and some beignets. And then like today, I, made sure I have my Bluetooth speaker next to me, as I'm working and playing music that, keeps me rolling and keeps me good mentally. Like, I think, like, it's, that's important in general, but I think like in this moment, it's even more imperative that it's like you're finding those different small ways or big ways, but just ways to just keep yourself mentally sound. So, I'm just trying to do that. And I think, in some ways it's been good just to really like channel that energy into creativity. So like, whether it's, personal pieces I'm working on, or just other work, just like really channeling that energy in a positive, creative way is what I think I've been trying to do. So.